The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz, and you're listening to the Financial Survival Network, which is brought to you by Miles Franklin. They've been in business selling gold and silver for over 20 years, and I'm a customer because when you buy, they ship. For more information, find them on the web at milesfranklin.com or give them a call at 800-822-8080 and get a free quote. Professor Walter Williams has been a beacon for freedom for decades. He's fought a never-ending battle, and he's always doing something to stoke the flames of controversy, which is why he's appearing on the Financial Survival Network to talk about current tenuous state of freedom in America and around the world today. Professor Williams, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you on here. I've been listening to you, reading your work for years. Sometimes the battle seems like it's not going in our favor, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does. It does not seem to go in our favors. But I think one of the things you have to keep in mind, we all have to keep in mind, is that personal liberty is not the normal state of affairs for mankind throughout his history. That is, throughout mankind's history, and indeed in most places in the world today, mankind has been subject to arbitrary abuse and control by others, and I think that maybe a historian writing about the world history, maybe 100 to 150 years from now, he might say, well, look, there was this tiny curiosity, historical curiosity, where people had private property rights and personal liberty mostly in the Western world and in the United States. And it lasted for a few years, and then it all went back to the normal state of affairs, namely arbitrary abuse and control by others. And I think that we're headed in that direction. But however, if you press me for an optimistic note, there is a slight optimistic note, and that is because of the brazenness of President Obama and the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives and Senate for his first 2 years of his administration. They were so brazen in terms of doing a lot of things, that this is the first time in my life where you have Americans arguing and debating about the Constitution. I think as 27 state governors have sued the federal government for Obamacare. I believe there's something like 30 state legislatures have passed 10th Amendment resolutions. There's the Tea Party movement, and then of course talk radio. And most of talk radio, the successful shows are the conservative / libertarian ones. So if there is a bit of hope, it's the fact that maybe many Americans are waking up, but however, it might be too little too late. And if you ask the question, which way are we headed, tiny steps at a time, are we headed towards more personal liberty or more government control over our lives? And it's unambiguously the latter.
Yeah, and that's scary, because I know we could have a whole 2-hour debate about public education and its state, but they don't really teach history. They don't teach what the founding fathers were thinking when they crafted the Constitution and the whole concept of a government of limited powers. Even in law school, they don't really teach that.
They're absolutely right. And and you would think that in law school they would have signed the Federalist Papers and to kind of get some kind of idea of the thinking of the founders. But in most law schools, the students don't know what the Federal Papers are. They have no inkling whatsoever.
Yeah, I didn't really read them until after law school. I had a constitutional law professor who his proudest achievement was that he was one of the architects of the legal strategy of Roe versus Wade, and how to get the Supreme Court to effectively create rights when none exist. to get them to do things, to be activists, and he was proud of that. But when it came to talking about little things like the Federalist Papers, like the debate between Hamilton and Jefferson, which we're still fighting now effectively in a lot of ways, I don't remember. Now, I might have slept through the class because he was a really boring character, and he used to wear these green polyester suits, and he was eccentric, but I don't remember him ever referring to it. It was, to him, the Constitution was just a barrier to be overcome to expand government control. And to all of our legislators in the House and Senate, regardless of their party, it seems that this is what they believe. There's no respect for the Constitution, is there?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And an example of the disrespect of the Constitution, there are many, many more examples of it. There's a congressman, and the name slips me right now, from Arizona, who he came to office, I think, in the 90s or in the late 80s or 90s, and each 2 years of when Congress began, he introduced a bill called the Enumerated Powers Act. And it's a very, very, it's like 2 or 3 sentences, and it says that Congress cannot enact any laws unless they can identify specifically in the Constitution where they're authorized to do it.
Yeah.
And
wow.
I think the maximum number of co-sponsors he ever got was something like 60 congressmen to support it.
So you look at Nancy Pelosi, and a reporter asked her, what is the constitutional basis for enacting Obamacare? And she looked at this guy like he was from another planet. Yeah. And the arrogance of power, and that we've become a government of virtually unlimited powers, gives one pause for thought. But yet we look at a Ron Paul, regardless what people think, he was running on a platform of freedom, economic freedom, and he might have had some ideas that we didn't agree with necessarily, but he really did address the issues, didn't he?
That's right. But see, the problem is that too many of us want to blame politicians for our problems, but the bulk of the blame lies with the American people, because politicians are doing precisely what the American people want them to do. And what do the American people want politicians to do? They want to use the power. They want politicians to use the power of their office and take somebody else's money and bring it back to them. And you see this, if you say, well, suppose I were running, you say, well, gee, Williams, you're insulting all the people in Connecticut. Well, suppose I were running for the Senate in Connecticut, and I go back and forth across the state, and I say, look, I've read the Constitution, and if you elect me to the Senate, don't expect for me to bring back aid to higher education, highway construction funds, prescription drugs, agriculture subsidies, because they're not in the Constitution. Do you think that the people of Connecticut would elect me to the Senate?
Oh, there's no possible way.
No way. And see, the tragedy of it is that the people of Connecticut would be acting absolutely right by not electing me to the Senate, because if I don't bring back billions and billions of dollars of handout money, then it doesn't mean that the citizens of Connecticut will pay a lower federal income tax. All that it means is that the people in Massachusetts will get it instead. That is, once legalized theft begins, it pays everybody to get involved.
We did have a candidate like that, Peter Schiff, pretty much saying that he was going to vote in favor of the Constitution and against benefits, and he didn't make it through the primary. And it transcends the, like you said, the politicians. But how do we educate people to make them understand that the end result of ever expanding federal power, regardless what the motivation is, eventually is totalitarianism, loss of freedom, because without freedom of economic freedom, you don't have political freedom, do you?
Yeah, I don't know. And it seems like you tell the American people, look, they ask the question, are we headed in the direction of countries like Greece and Spain, or are we headed away from them? And the answer is we're headed towards them. That is, the debt, Greece's debt as a percentage of GDP is 160%. Ours right now, I believe, is like 106% of GDP, whereby I think 1970 was no more than 34, 35% of GDP. So we're moving in the direction of these other failing European economies, and it seems like very few Americans are very concerned about that.
Yeah, I see it too, and I think that the country's in a depression. I don't think you could call it anything else. 20+% real unemployment, real GDP going down, even though GDP is not really a good measurement. Yeah. And so many other statistics, food stamps and public housing, right?
And the very fact that something like, I think it's over 40% of Americans, close to 50%, are getting some kind of handout from government. And what's worse than that is that close to 50% of taxpayers and their families have no federal income tax liability. That's a disaster, because if you don't pay any federal income tax, what do you care about taxes? That is, you become a constituent for big spending politicians to raise taxes. And this is one of the reasons why the so-called George Bush tax cuts weren't that popular, because if you're not paying taxes, what do you care about a tax cut?
Exactly. It's irrelevant to you. And Peter Schiff was testifying before Congress, and all these big government people were there saying we need to raise taxes to increase the revenue to the government because we're not taking enough. And he asked these people, how much do you think I pay in taxes? I'm at the top. How much do I pay? And they thought his effective rate was about 25 to 30 something percent. Mm-hmm. They didn't even know, because they're from academia and they're just getting a paycheck that the funds are being withheld. And they probably never even look at the numbers to see what exactly is being taken from their paycheck.
That's right. And that was one of the most devastating things about the withholding tax. By the way, the withholding tax, a lot of people don't know, it started out during World War II, and it was called the victory tax. and the justification for withholding, because before that you paid your money on March 15th, but the justification for the victory tax is so that you speed up the revenues coming into the government, so that they could pursue the war more efficiently. We had enough money, and so the victory tax. And they said it was, and we already won the war in the World War II, but we still have the tax, but we just don't call it a victory tax anymore.
Yeah, and
matter of fact, as Milton Friedman used to say, there's nothing in the world as permanent as a temporary government program.
Hey, and we have it in New York. We have this thing called Easy Pass. I guess you have it where you are too. So the toll roads, you go through the gate and you don't have to actually reach into your pocket and give the money to the toll taker. And instead, you get a statement at the end of the month and it's charged to your credit card. So when they raise the tax, the toll, which is just a tax for using a road or a bridge, when they raise it 25, 30% and you're paying $12, you don't feel the pain until the end of the month. So now when they raise taxes, there's no rebellion against it because it's stealth. Nobody's aware that they're paying it until it's too late. And they probably don't even look that closely at their credit card statements anyway.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And the American people just don't have any idea of the amount of total taxes. That is, there's the federal income tax, there's state tax, there's sales tax, there's property taxes, and then there's regulation, which is just an alternative way of taxing. And Milton Friedman said that we are being taxed, if we include everything. He said close to 45% of our earnings goes to some level of government.
That's distressing, and people really don't get it. And even the people who aren't paying the federal tax are paying all those other taxes, which are supposedly regressive because it's not based on your ability to pay. Yeah. So we've got this mess. Is the only option collapse, or is there enough education, or is there enough people waking up in the world now, understanding that, for instance, the ability to create money at whim by Bernanke's hitting a couple of zeros on his keyboard, maybe there's a better way to be structuring our monetary system.
There are many things that can be done, but sometimes people ask me, well, Walter, what can be done to save our country, for the future? And I ask them, I say, well, are American people somehow inherently different from the Romans, from the French, from the Spanish, from the Portuguese, from the British. And those are great empires of the past that went down the tubes. And and I don't think that there's any difference between Americans and these other people, as human beings. There's a real chance of our going down the tubes. And people say, well, gee, that's unbelievable. But, if you were at Queen Victoria's Jubilee in 1887, I believe, and if you had said that Great Britain would become a third-rate nation and almost defeated on the high seas by a sixth-rate nation, namely Argentina, you would have been put in the insane asylum, because it was inconceivable that Great Britain, where the same used to be, the sun would never set on the British crown and had the mightiest navy in the world, would ever come to what it was in the 1970s or 1980s. So we could go the same way, but maybe there's a window of opportunity. And that's with some of the things, the current movements, the Tea Party movement, the fact that Americans are paying more attention to the Constitution. Maybe there's a chance.
And don't forget the internet and
yes.
talk radio, where more information of what's really going on is available to people. And in a way, even though the schools have been dumbed down, the ability to get your own education has been dramatically expanded in this era.
That's right. And one of the great things about talk radio is that they've broken the monopoly of the mainstream media, and people realize, well, gee, I'm not by myself, because I'm against big government spending, I'm against welfare, or I'm against affirmative action. There's people who are against those things. They were portrayed as evil people, but talk radio has opened up and said, well, gee, there are many people that are just like I am, and that's a very, very important tool for. In the struggle against tyranny. Talk radio has done a wonderful job.
Yeah,
and of course led by my buddy Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, and the other thing we have there is that the institutionalized mainstream media is really anti-intellectual. There is no curiosity amongst them. They don't ever dig underneath the surface unless it's to smear somebody to find out things about the person. But in terms of actually engaging in an argument that could be important to the public about, for instance, whether it's taxes, whether it's rising military expenditures, whatever it is, they never really further the debate. All they do is give very pat answers, superficial, nothing.
That's right. And I've been teaching a little bit over 40 years. And for undergrad, once in a while I teach undergraduate courses. And the absolute worst students that I ever have are students who are communication majors and journalism majors. The absolutely worst in terms of being able to think and to be able to use deductive logic and other forms of reasoning.
That's really distressing. At least the one thing they did teach me in law school was how to use logic. Now, it might be to make arguments that I didn't believe in and to persuade people to come to the wrong conclusion, right? That's part of every argument is rhetoric. They don't teach rhetoric either in the schools. I just had to take a course from Audible with some guy who explained rhetoric to me for the first time. And all those little things that they stopped teaching that help people think and understand arguments doesn't exist anymore. But hopefully what we're doing, what we're saying is going to make a difference at some point.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So all we could do is try to be optimistic and just keep doing what we're doing.
Yes, that's right.
We got to get going, but thank you so much, Professor Williams, for coming on the Financial Survival Network. It's really been an enlightening 15 minutes. And if people want to find out more, get your books, read your articles.
And my website is walterewilliams.com.
And it's must reading, and we link to it regularly on the financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Hopefully, after the election, maybe we'll get some free-thinking, freedom-seeking, truth-telling politicians. Now, that would be a switch, wouldn't it?
Yes.
All right. Well,
thank you very much for inviting me.
Hey, thank you, and have a great weekend.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.